Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Asma Rehman, and I am the National Chapter Manager for Council on American-Islamic Relations Headquarters, and I will be facilitating today's discussion. Welcome, everyone, to the de-escalation and bystander intervention training titled How to Handle Voter Intimidation at the Polls. And thank you also for joining during some very busy, to say the least, times. And just a few days before the elections. Today's training will provide you with nonviolence principles so you can de-escalate a variety of scenarios at the polls and know which authorities to contact if the situation escalates. And to provide this training and share with you their wonderful work and their wisdom, we have two fabuladies, Courtney Mangus and Kit Bonson. But before I introduce them, I want to show everybody this very cool necklace that I'm wearing. It says vote, and Michelle Obama was the one to make it go trending. So this is your reminder throughout this entire presentation to make sure that you vote either this weekend or on Monday if you can still do early, or on Tuesday. So I'm going to introduce both Kit and Courtney at the same time, and then we're going to jump right into the training and presentation. So Kit Bonson is co-founder of the Montgomery County Civil Rights Coalition in Maryland. She has been an activist organizer for 40 years, primarily with organizations dedicated to peace and justice and to women's health. After seeing the increase in hate crimes following the 2016 elections, she created a bystander intervention training that emphasizes using nonviolence and de-escalation and providing support to the targeted person while ignoring the attacker. In the past 4 years, organizations across the US have used her script to provide free community trainings and trainings of the trainers for thousands of people of goodwill, including so many people in our own CAIR network have been trained by her, and then they've gone on and trained so many people as well, and Courtney is one such person. So if you'd like to give a bystander intervention training to your local group, the materials are provided on our Facebook event for this session and at www.mococivilrights.wordpress.com. But again, you can find that on the event page. And second, we have Courtney Mangus, the amazing Courtney Mangus, presenting as well. She's the programs coordinator for the San Francisco Bay Area office of CAIR, Council on American-Islamic Relations. In this position, she leads CAIR-SFBA's signature programs, including youth programs, workshops, the internship and volunteer programs, and so much more. Courtney received her Bachelor of Arts degree in comparative religion and minors, not just minor, in Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies and Arabic from Miami University of Ohio. She's in her third year at Santa Clara University School of Law, where she is studying to earn her JD. So we're coming from all over the United States to join you all today. I'm in the Midwest, Kit's on the East Coast, Courtney's on the West Coast. So welcome, Kit and Courtney, and thank you so much for sharing your work and your wisdom with us today.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
So Courtney, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Yeah, thank you, Asma, for that introduction. And I'm really excited to be here with you and Kit today to give everyone a little bit more background on what Asma said. I am one of the people that, have been trained through this training with the council, with CAIR San Francisco Bay Area office. And we've been doing this training for over 3 years now. And through our experience, we've modified and adjusted it for our audience and based on our experiences. And now we're using these principles from that training and applying them to intimidation at the polls. So we're going to get started by jumping in with understanding the values that underline this training. So it's really important to understand the values that underline bystander intervention, because no one training is going to teach you everything that you need to know about bystander intervention or de-escalation. And by reviewing these values, you're going to feel more comfortable to step in, even if you forget individual steps that we talk about today. So whenever you feel confused about, should I do this step or this other step, and you get kind of mixed up with the details, you can always fall back on the values of safety, support, and solidarity for the person who's being targeted. So we're going to go through these values first. And so the first value is safety. And we believe that de-escalation is the safest way to respond. And that's because there are really a lot of unknown factors that are involved when you are being targeted by an individual or someone is being targeted. And you never know what a stranger is capable of. That's why de-escalation is your safest way of responding. It's also really important to be aware of how your intervention affects everyone's safety. So throughout this training and this discussion, we're going to talk about various choices that you can make, and it's important to always think about the repercussions that they have. We also believe that practicing helps us, learn these steps. Now, we're not going to practice now, but I recommend that all of you take these steps with you at home and practice with the people around you. It's really going to make you feel more comfortable to step in when you're needed to. Our second value is support. So essentially, we are there to support what the targeted person wants. And this means that we provide options for the targeted person and we act according to their wishes. We ask the targeted person if they want our help, and we ask how we can best help them, and we ask before we touch them. And this is because consent is essential in all things, but especially when intervening to assist a targeted person. It's really important that you check in and make sure that they're okay with the decisions you're making. And we want to shift the focus of the situation from the targeted person, to the targeted person by only interacting with them as much as possible and by ignoring the attacker. And we do this because it's most effective and because we believe that the targeted person deserves our attention more than the attacker. And our last value that underlines this training is solidarity. And we believe that nonviolence is the most courageous way to respond. It's really easy to lash out, and it's more difficult to hold in your emotions and act from a principled place. And you may not yet feel like you can do that, but I hope that this training will help you get there and that you start to build that mentality. We are there in solidarity with the targeted person and not as their savior. So it's really important to remember this value after this training. Although it's our natural inclination to go to the source of the trouble and to try to make it stop, in other words, to engage directly with the attacker, we recognize that this is not the most strategic way to respond, and it doesn't empower the targeted person. And then lastly, we do not call the targeted person the victim because we want them to retain agency in the situation. So you've already heard me using the phrase targeted person, but we use that because really the goal of this training is to empower and give agency to the person that's being targeted. So we're using empowering language. So again, remember to fall back on these steps whenever you feel confused, or fall back on these values whenever you get confused by the steps. Essentially, you can modify different steps as long as you're always thinking about providing safety, providing support, and providing solidarity to the person who's being targeted. So now we're going to go through some steps that underline this training. So this is the steps that we would typically use in any sort of de-escalation bystander intervention scenario. So this is when you're out in public, maybe you're on a bus or you're in a park or you're in a public store, but you're in public and you witness someone who's being targeted because of their identity. So when you witness that happening, you can use these steps to de-escalate the situation and provide support to the targeted person. These steps can also be used in the voter intimidation that we're going to talk about. So a lot of these steps are going to be able to be applied here, and it may some steps may or may not be applied based on the logistics of the scene or what's happening. But essentially, our first step is to assess the situation, and that's always going to be true. So we really need to be ready to intervene. That's step one. You need to make sure that you are mentally and emotionally prepared to enter the situation. And it's really important that you do that assessment before stepping in. And then you also need to be aware of what's happening around you. So you need to be able to see, hear, and perceive everything that's happening around you so you are ready to react if a situation develops. So once you've assessed the situation and you see that someone is being targeted because of their identity, the next thing that you want to do is get others involved. And we do this to beat the bystander effect. And the bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon where the more people that are present to witness any event, the less likely any of them will be to step in and help. And this is because we disperse our responsibility onto the people around us. But you have the power to return people's responsibility to them by just letting them know that they are responsible and should be acting. So you can simply say, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think that we should do something. By simply saying that, you can ask more people to get involved, and they're going to be more likely to acknowledge that. So once you've gotten the attention of another bystander, the next thing that you want to do is give them directions for how to intervene. So it's important that you take the lead and give other bystanders directions, because it's unlikely that they've gone through any sort of training in de-escalation or bystander intervention. So you can simply say, do you see what's happening here? I think we should do something. Can you stay here and take a video while I go talk and see what happened? So this may not apply in the voting situation, but in a real life situation, the video will apply. But there are many options for what a bystander can do, but this is one example. So once you've got others involved, the next thing that you're going to do is intervene calmly. And so this is when you're going to come up to the targeted person and you're going to introduce yourself quietly and explain what you saw was happening and you would like to provide support. So in this moment, it's really important to be aware of your tone and your body language as you move closer to the targeted person so they don't perceive you as a threat. It's best to come in at eye level with a calm tone. And when you introduce yourself, it's really important to be straightforward and say something like, hi, my name's Courtney. I saw what was happening. I want to be here to support you. Is it okay if I sit down next to you? Or, if you're in a more mobile situation, is it okay if I walk by you? Or is it okay if I stand next to you? Or is it okay if I talk to you? So you're asking permission before doing anything. If the person says that they're fine and they don't want support, you can move back, but monitor the situation. So it's important that we respect the wishes of the targeted person. So if they don't want your support, you don't have to force it. But you can always step back and see how the situation develops and offer again, or to collect evidence. So you can let them know, like, okay, I understand. I'll be over here in case you change your mind. And that might make you feel a little bit better about respecting those wishes. So the next step that you're going to do is, ignore the attacker. So at this point, you're talking to the targeted person, and it can be about anything. But you're having this conversation as a way to ignore the attacker and as a way to distract the targeted person from the targeted language. So at this point, you want to ignore the attacker, even if they escalate verbally. And this is because we believe that ignoring the attacker has the greatest chance of de-escalating the situation. But I want to note that that's not guaranteed. And if an attacker doesn't de-escalate quickly, think of alternative solutions like leaving. It's really important to be aware of whether or not the attacker is escalating or de-escalating, and make your decisions based on that. And it's really important to be aware of the attacker's location and exit routes. So even if you're ignoring the attacker, make sure that you can still see them in your peripheral vision so that if they were to escalate or become violent, you would see it happen. And this is a time where you may want to ask the targeted person if they would like to leave if the attacker continues to escalate. And lastly, our last step is we're going to continue to support the targeted person. So after the attacker leaves, continue speaking with the targeted person. Let them know that they can report the incident. CAIR, the ACLU, and other organizations have reporting tools for reporting hate crimes and hate incidents. And we're also going to go through what you can do to report, voter intimidation, that sort of thing. So there are reporting options. That's a good time to talk about that. You may want to also ask if they need help finding mental health resources or counseling because of what they've gone through, or they may just want to keep talking so that they're not alone. And then most importantly, make sure that they get to their next destination safely. You can offer to walk with them or help them get transportation, but make sure you don't just abandon them in a vulnerable situation on their own. So that covers the values that underline this training, and then general steps that you can use to de-escalate a targeted person, an attacker, and provide support to a targeted person. Now we're going to look at how we can take these values and these steps and apply them to voter intimidation. So I'm going to give it over to Kit to talk about voter intimidation and how we apply these values.
Hi, so under federal law, it is obviously a crime for a person to intimidate, threaten, coerce, or attempt to intimidate, threaten, or coerce any person for the purpose of interfering with the right to vote. And it's also unlawful to engage in conduct that results or has the intent to result in the denial of the right of any citizen to vote on account of race, color, or disability, or frankly, anything that a person may wish to interfere on the basis of. Next slide. Courtney, is it back to you?
Nope, this is still you.
Okay, so examples of conduct that could be illegal voter intimidation. There's many different things that there could be. So simple things like following voters around, standing behind voters, taking notes, loudly discussing voter fraud laws in a voter's presence as if they somehow would apply to them, invasions of a voter's physical space, getting really close to them, suggesting possible future violence, prosecution, or legal action based on a voter's presence at the polls, loitering watchfully near voters while visibly carrying a firearm. Obviously, this is legal in some places and quite illegal in other places in other states. Violent behavior inside or outside of a polling place, confronting voters while wearing military-style or official-looking uniforms, law enforcement officers, even off-duty, loitering by voters without having a specific legal intent, disrupting voter lines or blocking entrances to a polling place, aggressively approaching a voter's vehicle and writing down the voter's license plate number, harassing voters or aggressively questioning them about their qualifications to vote, and last, spreading false rumors about voter fraud, voter requirements, or related criminal penalties. Next slide. So what should you do if you see this sort of intimidation at the polls? And it could be that you observe it yourself or it's something that's coming on to you. Well, intimidation or violence ahead of elections can have serious impact on the ability or even the willingness of eligible citizens to protect democracy in America by exercising their right to vote. We can't prevent somebody with ill intentions from showing up at the polls, but what we can do is choose to educate and empower ourselves and support our fellow community members if they are being harassed while exercising their right to vote. Next slide. So during this segment of the presentation, we'll discuss how you might respond if you or someone you observe experiences harassment or voter intimidation at the polls. And in order to do this, we're going to apply the principles of bystander intervention that Courtney already laid out for us. And the most important principle that we want to teach today is that if you see someone being harassed at the polls, again, we only want you to offer solidarity and support to that person being targeted without interacting in any way with the people who are doing the intimidating. Next slide. So we just have a little disclaimer, and we want to say that this information is not legal advice, and it's only intended as community information because every situation is different, and the information shared here cannot possibly be comprehensive or applicable to every incident or scenario. And in the event that you observe or experience voter intimidation at the polls, we want you to use your best judgment. And most of all, we don't want you to put yourself in harm's way. Do not intervene if doing so may endanger you or others' safety or escalate the tensions that are already there. Next slide. So what do you do when you encounter voter intimidation? Well, remember, our goal is to help ensure that voting can take place safely in a non-threatening environment. And we want to avoid escalating the situation, which can spread alarm and exacerbate the intimidation. So documentation is going to be critical. If you don't have a pen and paper, make a note on your phone, text the information to a trusted family member or friend, and record all the details. So Who, what, where, when, why. What's happening? What's the time, date, location? Who was involved? What were they wearing? Were they patrolling? Were they wearing any particular clothing or signs that might help to identify them? What exactly are they doing, and what makes their conduct intimidating or coercive or threatening? And then finally, are there any other witnesses? Presumably this is happening in a voter poll line, so there are going to be a lot of other people. You may wish to get contact information from them. Do you have a camera phone? If you do, and you can safely and legally record a video of what was happening, that might be something to consider as well. So we want you to keep these numbers handy before you head off to the polls. And so there's the Election Protection Hotline, that's 866 Our Vote, which also translates to 866-687-8683. And then there's also the U.S. Department of Justice Voter Rights Hotline, and that is 800-253-3931. And remember, voter intimidation is not protected by the First or Second Amendments at all. There is a central authority, thankfully, at a polling place. So a lot of the bystander intervention training that we do, it's going to be out in public, it's going to be on a train, it's going to be somewhere else where it may be very difficult to either identify or find a central authority. But at a poll, there are people who can be alerted. So notify election officials if the intimidation escalates. And if the intimidation seems to be escalating, or it would not be safe to provide direct support to the person being targeted, like Courtney was instructing, you can have someone hold your place in line so that you can go inside to the polling place and report the harassment to an election judge. They're always there by law. Ask the judge to help stop the intimidation, including by contacting other election officials if necessary. In the case of an emergency situation where voter intimidation has already escalated to a place where violence seems imminent or has already occurred, notify authorities by calling 911 to report the incident. When it's safe to do so, then call that 866 Election Protection Hotline number, a State Board of Elections number, and we're going to have those at the very end, or you can also contact CAIR. And if it's not an emergency situation, the incident should still be reported to that 866 number to the State Board of Elections and the CAIR, but not necessarily to the police. And that's because we recognize that the presence of law enforcement can itself be intimidating to many voters. So again, be mindful that police presence may not reassure a targeted person. Some may see the presence of police as a risk of escalation in and of itself, and this can be because of their personal or community experience with law enforcement that has been disrespectful or even dangerous. So they have legitimate concerns about their safety, and they may be also undocumented and fear arrest. But let's say that you observe a situation of less serious intimidation, where you can step up to provide support to the targeted person through bystander intervention. And bystander intervention assumes that, one, we have an ethical, social, and political obligation to help each other out when we are in a position, both situationally and psychologically, to do so. Stepping up to act in solidarity with others can help to reduce the impact of a problematic situation. 3, the best way of responding, as we've said over and over, is through de-escalation. 4, as a bystander, remember you are there to support the targeted person. That means that it's not going to be about what you want, it's going to be about what they want. And 5, thinking through how to respond in advance helps us to be prepared and get past our hesitations so we can step up when necessary. And that's what we're hoping that this training will do for you. Our training today emphasizes ways of responding where you do not engage with the attacker. And we're going to say that over and over again. Do not engage with a person who is bringing harassment or intimidation. Ignore them as much as possible and focus on providing support to the person being attacked. And make sure that you always respect the wishes of the person that you're helping. This means that if you see somebody acting in an intimidating fashion, even though you might want to do some of these things, do not do them. You should not tell them to leave the targeted person alone, because even though that's a reasonable thing to say, what it is that it's going to escalate the situation potentially because you're engaging with them. You don't want to try to negotiate with them. You don't want to try and reason with them. You don't want to scowl or make other faces or gestures at them. You don't even want to angrily tell them, back up, or especially yell epithets at them, stop being a jerk. You definitely do not want to get close. You don't want to touch them, and you definitely don't want to push them. So instead, what you want to do is offer support to the targeted person or group and only engage with officials and authorities who can help to de-escalate and resolve the situation. So what about taking videos of intimidation at polling places? Well, you can't record inside of a polling place, but you can have the right to videotape outside of the no electioneering zone, outside of polling places. So the ACLU has let us know that. So you will know when you are inside and outside because you'll see where the signs are and are not. And remember that when you're taking a video of a situation, that you want to hold the phone sideways to get more of the scene. And that's important because that way it can be shown on television because the perspective is correct. And you also want to hold the phone steady, not zoom it, but scan the scene slowly and steadily so you can capture everything without it blurring. You want to monitor the situation continuously and put your phone away if it begins to feel dangerous. You can also lower the phone so you're not obviously filming, or you could leave the audio function rolling. Now, there are varying laws in states about whether or not you need two-party authorization, whether the person being filmed or recorded can be videotaped without their permission. So you might want to check in advance about that. On the other hand, if you're videotaping or audio taping something that was violent or intimidating, I think that there's a difference there about whether or not people would make an allowance, but it may not be legal. So we already discussed some of these examples of voter intimidation, right? So these are lesser kinds of voter intimidation, still awful, still things we don't want to ever let pass without trying to support somebody. So following voters around, standing behind voters, taking notes, loudly suggesting voter fraud laws are applicable in a voter's presence, suggesting possible future violence, prosecution, or legal action because that voter came to the polls that day. So in those kind of situations, consider, again, asking that the person behind you or in front of you hold your place in line, because you know what? They saw that too. And then walk over and ask if the person or people being targeted are okay. Introduce yourself, explain that you saw what was happening, but don't interact with the people or groups engaged in harassment or intimidation. Just stand there with the person who is being targeted. And if you see intimidation, you can also go and notify an election judge or deputize somebody to go and do that. And again, that 866 number, our vote, really important in case you want to report something. Now, what about examples of escalated voter intimidation? Things like invasions of a voter's physical space, getting right up next to them, loitering near voters while visibly carrying a firearm, violent behavior inside or outside a polling place. Well, if you see this sort of intimidation, we do not want you to try and handle the situation by yourself. We want you to seek out an authority. That could be a poll judge, an election hotline, that 866 number, or even calling the police through 911. That's one way to report the incident. And then if you can do so safely, offer solidarity and support to the person or the group being targeted. But again, if it doesn't seem like that's something that would do a de-escalation, then maybe that's not the right time. And then finally, call the 866 number. Next slide. So we just want to leave this up while we're taking questions. These are the voter protection hotline numbers for each of the states. You may have to squint a little or get close to your screen, but we want all of you to have these to put into your phone now before you go down to the polls. Thanks very much. I know that Courtney and I are very pleased to be able to present to you today. Asma, did you want to take the questions?
Yeah, so Courtney, did you have anything else that you wanted to add here towards the end before we close off and take questions?
No, I think that was it. Thanks so much for having us. But I did want to say, I don't know if we addressed it as clearly, but if you are the person experiencing the intimidation, Kit can talk a little bit about this too as well. But your one option for you is to ask someone nearby to talk to you. So like saying to them, this is really bothering me. Is it okay if we just strike up a conversation so I don't have to pay attention to that? And then monitoring to see if the situation continues to escalate, and then if so, potentially asking, potentially leaving if that's the case, if it's too dangerous, asking someone to hold your place in line, seeking out additional authority figures nearby, so on.
Yeah, and so that's an important thing because you can solicit your own support. There's no reason that somebody who's standing in line shouldn't want to give you support. And you can tell what kind of people those are going to be by the way that they're looking at this situation, because there are going to be people who are looking at you like, I cannot believe this is happening. That's the person that you want to go stand by, even if it means getting out of line, even if it means cutting in line. Cutting in line a little ahead of you might also be escalating for the person who's intimidating you, so maybe look behind you. But yeah, it's really important that you get the care that you need. These people are trying to make you leave. And so it may be that the safest thing for you to do right then is to leave, call the police, call an election judge, call the 866 number, and then return later. We don't want this to happen, but in the end, if it does not feel safe, we want you to be able to come back safely. Courtney, do you want to jump in on anything you're thinking?
Yeah, and then in addition, if you anticipate that this may happen to you, if you feel afraid already that intimidation might happen to you at the polling place because of your identity, maybe because of your community, my recommendation is that you bring people with you to the polling location, bring family, friends, to provide support so that you don't have to do that alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Courtney and Kit. We are going to go ahead and open the floor for our viewers to ask some questions now. So if you are watching and have questions for us, we highly recommend that you ask them. We have plenty of time left over to be able to answer them. And it looks like we have, and the way that you do that is type it into the Facebook chat or into the YouTube chat, however you're watching this right now. And it looks like we already have a couple of questions that have come in. The first question is from Sham Sriram. He says, Assalamu alaikum. What should we do if there are armed people at our precincts? Calling the police is not an option to quote unquote de-escalate. And Kit, you may have answered this a little bit, but if either of you want to, either restate it or give a little bit more information, that'd be great.
I think this is that was weird. I think this is a good place to reiterate that what we want to do is de-escalate. So this is why we've been really clear that interacting with an attacker of any sort is not going to happen, because we want to have it go down, not get into a dialogue. We don't want to increase the drama, because drama is really delicious and it's not what we want to engage with. So if you see somebody with a gun, you want to move aside from them, stay in line, ignore them, turn your back, have the person in front of you say, maybe you talk to them and say, I'm going to turn my back on this guy, but maybe you could watch and see how this might be escalating. And then you could introduce yourself to the people and suggest that there may be a need for one of us to go inside and contact a poll judge about this. So those are some of the ways that I'm thinking of. Courtney, did you have some other thoughts?
You covered everything that I
mean, unfortunately, in Maryland where I live, it is legal, or it is not legal to have guns on site at a polling place. So that takes care of that. But I'm presuming that the questioner lives in a state where it is both legal and that the police are, a little bit inclined to think that that would be a reasonable thing to do. And in that sort of a case, we have to protect ourselves.
Yeah, so everyone should find out if that's the case in your own state. It's going to be different.
On the other hand, though, I do go back to the thing that we said earlier, that voter intimidation is never legal, and it is not a violation of the First or Second Amendment. So it may be legal for a person to be on site holding a gun very visibly, and yet intimidation is not something. And of course, intimidation is a judgment call. But at the same time, what we want to do is try and explain. So there should be that 866 number, our vote, in your phone, so that if this happens, there is a record that this is what a person with a gun was doing. They were standing 6 inches from me. That's voter intimidation, right? Why is a person, any person, going to stand 6 inches from you, let alone with a gun? But one more thing to say, if they start seeming menacing with that gun, your life is way more important on this day. So if you start feeling threatened, or other people around you start feeling threatened, and a voter, a poll judge is not able to come out immediately, maybe it's okay to step out of line, because we want you to be able to vote perhaps later.
That's really good advice. Thank you so much, Kit. We have another question, if we could have that question on the screen as well. Assalamu alaikum. What should we do if a poll worker tells us that too many people are in line and we cannot vote there? I heard this happened in Pennsylvania or New Jersey.
You want to take that? It is, I'm not a lawyer. Courtney is not a lawyer. We are going to give you our best assessment of what it is true, but this is not legal advice, right? I believe that it is always legal to be able to vote if you are in line at the time that the polls close. And if they are telling you that you are not going to be able to vote, then call the 866 number, call the number for your state, and report that this is what's happening, and get everyone around you to do the very same thing. Because this is one way that voter suppression happens, and we don't want to let that happen. Now, if you're walking up and it's 1 minute after the polls close and there's a long line and you're thinking, I'll just sneak in, that isn't legal, right? We know this, and they're going to make a demarcation. So don't you attempt to do something that is not legal. But if you're in line, you should be able to vote. And if you need to, you can insist on getting a provisional ballot. That's always another option.
I believe those are all the questions. If folks have any, oh, there's another one. Okay. Is it mandatory under federal law to have election workers who can speak a language other than English, or is this up to each state?
Boy, I'm outside of my experience, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it being a law under federal law, but I'm not sure either. And I would think that it would be left up to the states, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and of course, our country is such a beautiful melting pot that being able to accommodate at a polling place every potential language that could be, of interest is not always going to be the case, even if it were.
Well, it looks like those are all of the questions that we have right now. I'm just trying to scroll through really quickly and see if I've missed anything. I don't think I have. Well, thank you to everyone for your comments and your questions in the chat, and especially thank you to Courtney and Kit for sharing such useful information. And I know many of the people in the chat have also said that they're going to be able to take this information back to their communities, or as one of the commenters is a professor, taking it back to his students. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. And what was that?
One more thing.
Of course.
Yeah, so it's great if you have a class to bring this back to, but just talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, say, I took this really interesting thing, and there are these principles, and basically they are, Only support the targeted person. Don't talk to the attacker. Get out of there if it becomes violent. But there's this 866 Our Vote number, and let's all put it in our phones now. So if you spread that out and then they go and tell their people about it, this is one way for this concatenation of information and wisdom to go out in the community. So even people who are not able to be here today are able to hear that there's a way for us to support our beloved community.
Yes, thank you so much, Kit. And if either of you have anything else to add, Courtney, if you have anything to add, please do, or we can sign off. I see you.
My last thing to add is that everyone should go out and vote, and that was probably going to be Asma's last thing to add. So
yeah, you knew. You took it from me, but you can never say that too much, right? So go vote, everyone. Go vote on Tuesday or before then. Thank you all for tuning in, and we have a number of other events coming up. We have a town hall tomorrow. We'll be having a full day of programming on Tuesday. You can find all the information on our page on Facebook. So we look forward to seeing you all. And again, thank you so much, Courtney and Kit, for joining us and for giving us all this useful information. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.